Last summer, me, my friend James, his girlfriend Emily, and our friend Sean decided to do a cross-country road trip. You know, one of those find yourself kind of trips. We've just graduated college and wanted one last hurrah before adulting hit us like a truck. We planned this whole route, hitting up national parks, quirky roadside attractions, and all that jazz. So we're on day 5, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, on Highway 17. If you've ever driven through the Midwest, you know how creepy it gets at night. It was around 11 p.m., pitch black outside, and the only light was from our headlights and the moon. James was driving, Emily was in the passenger seat, and Sean and I were in the back. We were all laughing about something stupid when I saw something up ahead in the distance. It looked like an animal or something crossing the road. James slowed down, and as we got closer, we realized it wasn't an animal. It was, I don't know, man. It was something else. It was hunched over, almost like it was crawling. But its limbs were all wrong, like they were too long and bent at weird angles. I remember James saying, "Dude, what the hell is that?" I didn't have an answer. We were all just staring, slack-jawed. James slowed the car to the crawl, and we watched as this thing moved across the road and disappeared into the field on the other side. We sat there for a minute, trying to process what we just saw. Should we call the cops? I asked. But what would we even say? Hey, we just saw a creepy-ass creature on Highway 17. They'd think we were high or something. We decided to keep driving, but the mood in the car had shifted. We were all on edge, eyes darting around Bon, trying to spot anything out of the ordinary. About 10 minutes later, we saw it again. This time, it was on our side of the road, just standing there. Its eyes reflected the headlights, glowing like a cat's, but way, way more effed up. James floored it and we sped past it. My heart was pounding, and I kept looking back, half expecting it to be chasing us. But it didn't. It just stood there, watching us. We didn't stop driving until we hit the next town, and even then we only stopped because we were running on fumes. We found a cheap motel and checked in, but none of us could sleep. We kept hearing weird noises outside, like scratching at the window and low growls. Every time I'd start to drift off, I'd jerk awake, convinced the thing was outside our door. Emily kept the light on all night, and James sat by the window, keeping on watch. Sean was muttering something about curses and bad vibes. The next morning, we left out of there fast. We didn't talk much about it, just kind of an unspoken agreement to pretend it didn't happen, but I can't get it out of my head. What the hell did we see that night? A few weeks after we got home, I did some Googling, trying to find any info on what it could have been. I came across some forums and Reddit threads about similar sightings in that area. People had different theories. Some said it was a skinwalker. Others thought it was some government experiment gone wrong. I don't know what to believe, but it freaked me out knowing we weren't the only ones who saw it. To this day, I avoid Highway 17. I've told a few friends about it, but most just laugh it off or think we were imagining things. But I know what we saw, and I hope to God I never see it again. So it was me, my friend Irone, and our other friend Carl. We decided to take a road trip from our hometown in Tennessee to some random little town in Colorado. Why Colorado? Who knows, we were just looking for some adventure. We loaded up my beat-up old Honda Civic, stocked up on snacks and drinks, and hit the road. The first couple of days were smooth. We blasted music, took turns driving, and made stupid jokes to keep ourselves awake. But things started getting weird when we hit Kansas. That place is just empty. Miles and miles of flat nothingness. It was around 10 p.m. when we decided to pull off the highway and find a place to crash for the night. We ended up in this tiny town called Greensburg. Looked like it hadn't changed since the 60s. We found a sketchy-looking motel that had maybe 3 other cars in the parking lot. But hey, it was cheap and we were tired. The old guy at the desk gave us our key and we crashed hard. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of tapping on the window. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it again louder this time. I nudged Irone awake and he grumbled something about it being too early. I told him to shut up and listen. He heard it too, tap, tap, tap. We both got out of bed and slowly approached the window. Carl was still knocked out, lucky him. Aaron pulled back the curtain just a bit and peeked outside. There was nothing. No one. We figured it was just some tree branch or something and went back to bed. The next morning, we hit the road again, but Aaron couldn't stop talking about the tapping. He was convinced someone was messing with us. Carl brushed it off as a raccoon or something, and I tried to laugh it off too. But deep down, I had this gnawing feeling that something was off. That night, we decided to push through and drive straight to Colorado without stopping. We were all creeped out by Greensburg and didn't want to risk another weird night. We were somewhere in the middle of nowhere, about 100 miles from the Colorado border, when the car started acting up. The engine was making this weird knocking sound and the dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. We pulled over to check it out, but none of us knew anything about cars. The best we could do was to stare at the engine and hope it would magically fix itself. Spoiler, it didn't. We were stuck. No cell service, no nearby towns, just us and the empty road. Aaron suggested we flag down a passing car for help, but it was late, and we hadn't seen another car for hours, so we waited. After what felt like forever, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. We started waving like maniacs, hoping the driver would see us and stop. The car slowed down and pulled over. It was an old beat-up truck, even older than my Civic. The driver was this creepy-looking dude, maybe in his 50s, with a greasy mullet and a smile that made my skin crawl. He rolled down his window and asked if we needed help. Aaron explained our situation, and the guy offered to give us a ride to the nearest town. Every horror movie I've ever seen flashed through my mind, but we didn't have many options. We piled into the truck, and I ended up in the front seat with Mullet Man. The smell of old cigarettes and something else I couldn't quite place filled the cab. The guy introduced himself as Hank and started driving. He asked us where we were headed, and when we told him Colorado, he let out this weird laugh. Long way from home, huh? You kids be careful. Lots of strange things happen out here. Great. Just what we needed to hear. After about 30 minutes of awkward small talk and Hank's creepy comments, we saw a gas station up ahead. Hank pulled in and we practically leapt out of the truck. We thanked him and he just smiled that unsettling smile and drove off. We managed to get a tow truck to take us and the Civic to a nearby mechanic. The guy at the shop told us the car needed a new part that wouldn't be in until the next day. So we were stuck in another tiny town for the night. This one was even smaller than Greensburg. We found a diner and grabbed some food. The waitress was super nice and told us about a nearby B&B that had rooms available. We figured it sounded better than another sketchy motel, so we headed over. The B&B was run by this sweet old lady named Doris. The place was cozy and actually pretty nice. Doris showed us to our room and we settled in. We were all exhausted and just wanted to crash, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of creaking floorboards outside our room. I thought it might be Doris, but then I heard whispering. It sounded like multiple voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I got up and peeked through the peephole, but all I saw was darkness. Suddenly, the door handle started jiggling. I backed away, heart pounding. Aaron and Carl were still asleep, completely oblivious. The door slowly creaked open, and I saw someone standing there. It was Hank. I froze. How the hell did he find us? He stepped into the room, and I could see the glint of a knife in his hand. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Hank moved closer, and I knew I had to do something. I grabbed the lamp from the bedside table and smashed it over his head. Aaron and Carl woke up to the chaos. Hank was on the floor, groaning and bleeding. We didn't stick around to find out if he was going to get up. We grabbed our stuff and bolted out of there, running down the stairs and out into the night. We made it to the mechanic's shop and banged on the door until the guy finally let us in. We told him everything and he called the cops. They found Hank still at the B&B unconscious. We left town as soon as the car was fixed, and we didn't stop until we reached Colorado. So yeah, if you ever find yourself in the middle of nowhere and some creepy dude offers you a ride, maybe just don't. Back in summer of 2023, me and my buddy Oliver decided to do a classic road trip across the Midwest. We'd both just graduated, had some time before starting our jobs, and figured it'd be the perfect time to see some random small towns and just vibe. We mapped out our route to hit up a bunch of places, including some cool parks and old roadside attractions. We started from Chicago, and the first few days were chill. We saw the world's largest ball of twine in Cawker City, Kansas, and even stayed at this weird, haunted hotel in Iowa, which was more kitschy than creepy. But things started getting weird when we hit South Dakota. We were headed to see the Badlands and decided to take some back roads to make the drive more interesting. Our GPS kept rerouting us due to some road closures, and we ended up on this stretch of highway that felt like it hadn't seen traffic in years. The kind of road where you don't see another car for miles. It was getting late, and the sun was setting, casting these long shadows over the road. We were in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but fields and the occasional dilapidated barn. Oliver was driving when we saw him. A guy just walking on the side of the road. He was wearing this old, dirty hoodie and jeans that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. Oliver slowed down a bit, and we both just stared at him. I mean, who walks along a highway in the middle of nowhere at dusk? He didn't even look up as we passed, just kept trudging along like he had some place to be. We kept driving, but I couldn't shake the weird feeling. After a few minutes, I turned to Oliver and said, "Dude, that was creepy as F." He just nodded. "Yeah, man, super weird." We laughed it off, chalking it up to some drifter or local who'd had too much to drink. But about 10 minutes later, we saw him again. The same guy, same clothes, same slow walk. There's no way he could have gotten ahead of us. We hadn't turned or taken any detours. "Did we just loop?" Oliver asked. "No, we've been going straight the whole time," I replied, my voice shaking a bit. We drove past him again, and this time I swear he turned his head slightly to watch us. I felt a chill run down my spine. We decided to keep going and try to find somewhere to stop for the night, but the road just kept stretching on with no signs of civilization. After another 20 minutes, we saw him again. This time, he was standing in the middle of the road facing our car. Oliver slammed on the brakes, and we skidded to a stop just a few feet from him. He didn't move and just stared at us. "Let's get out of here," Oliver whispered, and I didn't argue. He reversed the car, turned around, and we sped back the way we came. We didn't see him again, but neither of us spoke until we finally saw lights from a small town in the distance. We found a motel, checked in, and tried to shake off the encounter. But that night, I had the worst nightmares. I dreamt of the man, standing at the foot of my bed. When I woke up, I found Oliver sitting by the window, looking out into the parking lot. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking he's out there." We decided to cut the trip short and head back to Chicago. On the way back, we avoided back roads and stuck to the main highways, but the feeling of unease never left us. A few weeks later, I was scrolling through some old forums about haunted highways and came across a story about a stretch of road in South Dakota where travelers had reported seeing a strange man. Some said he was a ghost of a hitchhiker who'd been hit by a car decades ago. Others claimed he was a harbinger of bad luck. I don't know what we saw that night, but I haven't taken a back road since. It's a story that still gives me chills every time I think about it. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I find myself glancing at the side of the road, half expecting to see him again. My friend Kyle and I decided to take a road trip from San Diego to Denver. We had a week off from work and wanted to hit some national parks along the way. We were stoked for the adventure and had our route all planned out. Joshua Tree, Grand Canyon, Monument Valley, and finally, Denver. We left San Diego early on a Monday morning. The drive to Joshua Tree Park was smooth, and we spent the day hiking and taking photos. By sunset, we were back on the road, trying to find a motel for the night. As we were driving through the desert, the sky turned a deep orange, and we saw an old car on the side of the road. A guy was standing next to it, waving us down. We slowed down and pulled over. The guy looked to be in his late 20s, with greasy hair and a scruffy beard. He said his car had broken down, and he needed a ride to the nearest gas station. Kyle and I exchanged glances, but decided to help him out. I mean, we'd want the same if we were in his shoes. He hopped in the back seat, introduced himself as Travis, and we started driving. The nearest gas station was about 15 miles away, so we made small talk to pass the time. Travis seemed nice enough, but there was something off about him. He kept fidgeting and looking out the windows like he was expecting someone to show up. When we got to the gas station, he thanked us and got out. We filled up our tank and grabbed some snacks. Just as we were about to leave, we saw Travis talking to another guy who had pulled up in a truck. They were having a heated conversation, and Travis kept pointing in our direction. Kyle and I felt uneasy, so we decided to get out of there before things got weird. We hit the road again, but the encounter left us feeling on edge. We found a motel late that night, checked in, and crashed. The next morning, we continued our trip, trying to shake off the weirdness from the night before. Everything was fine until we reached a rest stop near the Arizona-Utah border. We were taking a break, stretching our legs, when we noticed a familiar truck parked a few spaces away. It was the same truck from the gas station. The guy Travis had been talking to was sitting inside, staring at us. "Do you think he's following us?" Kyle asked, his voice low. "I don't know, man," I replied, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "But we should get out of here." We got back in the car and took off, constantly checking the mirrors to see if the truck was following us. It didn't seem to be, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We reached Monument Valley by late afternoon and decided to camp there for the night. We set up our tent, made a small fire, and tried to relax. But as the sun went down, we heard the sound of an engine in the distance. We looked up and saw the same truck from earlier, slowly driving past our campsite. "Seriously, what's this guy's deal?" Kyle muttered. We watched as the truck drove a little further before stopping. The guy got out, looked around, and then got back in his truck and drove off. We didn't see him again that night, but neither of us slept well. The next day, we decided to push on to Denver without any more stops. We were both freaked out and just wanted to get to a city where we felt safer. The drive was long, and we were both exhausted by the time we reached Denver. We checked into a hotel downtown, hoping that being in a crowded place would make us feel better. The first night in Denver was nothing special, and we started to relax a bit. We spent the next day exploring the city, checking out breweries, and just enjoying ourselves. But on our second night, things took a turn. We were heading back to our hotel after dinner when we noticed the same truck parked across the street. The guy from before was leaning against it, smoking a cigarette and watching us. Our hearts sank. "Okay, this is getting too weird," Kyle said, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the cops." We ducked into a nearby coffee shop and called the police, explaining the situation. They arrived a few minutes later, but by then, the guy had taken off. The cops took our statement and told us they'd keep an eye out. But there wasn't much they could do without more information. That night, we barely slept. The next morning, we decided to cut our trip short and head back to San Diego. We were too freaked out to enjoy the rest of our vacation. The drive back was tense, but thankfully nothing happened. We didn't see the truck or the guy again. When we finally got home, we felt a huge sense of relief. We never figured out who the guy was or why he was following us. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but the whole thing left us shaken. We haven't taken a road trip since, and I'm not sure we ever will.